Okay, we're live. Welcome everybody to episode 18 of the Scholar Gypsies. Today's guest is Niamh. Niamh is a 24-year-old legal executive training to be a solicitor. She was formerly described herself as a trans radical activist as part of her journey um, through life, if you like, and part of that journey brought her through an LGBTQIA plus um, organization called Belong To. So I've asked Niamh, we've had a number of conversations up to this. She's asked to have her, just have her face and her identity kept private. So I'm happy to do that. Um, so welcome, Niamh. And I just wanted to say thanks very much for agreeing to do this interview. And I
Of course.
suppose, yeah.
No, thank you very much for having me, and hopefully this reaches as many people as possible.
Okay, yeah, hopefully it will. Niamh, I suppose let's start at the beginning. And I suppose the beginning for me would be to ask at what age did you become aware of your sexuality?
So I think I was maybe 15. I realized that I was interested in girls, and or that it was okay for me personally. I was raised in a household where we all knew it was okay to be gay, but I'd always thought it was, oh, it's okay for other people. And then I realized, oh wait, no, I I'm also allowed. And I had crushes on boys, and I had can't really call them relationships when they last 2 weeks, but they like I had, I'd kissed a few boys when I was younger. And so I thought that I that meant that I was bisexual. And then over the years I realized that no, I'm just a plain old lesbian. But I had my time in Belong To, and that confused a lot of things and prolonged that journey to realization of being a lesbian. Uh, but yeah, no, now I'm very confident in in the fact that I'm just a lesbian.
It sounds like quite a it sounds it sounds like a bit of an ordeal that those years you were in that movement. But what I wanted to ask, I suppose a question is, can you remember who or where you became aware of trans as something that was a possibility?
Um,
Or
I'd
how was it introduced to you, um, if you can remember?
So I think maybe I'd seen one or two videos on YouTube, but that just came up on my feed, recommended feed. But I knew it was a thing, but I didn't think it was a big thing or a very common thing. And then
Hmm.
I started hanging out with people, and Belong To is Dublin based. So I started hanging out outside of school with people my age on the weekends, whatever. And then there was a lot of people who were identifying as either non-binary or gender fluid or trans. And that's kind of when I realized it was this thing, that there was actually quite a lot of teenagers my age back then. There was 16 in my extended circle of friends, um that at the time truly believed that they were. Only three, the last time I checked it in online, only three of them still identify as a gender that they weren't born as. um Meaning that the margin is huge for how many realized that they weren't and went back to
Hmm.
identifying with their sex. um but yeah, it I think it was about 2015 that I realized that there was this huge number of people that I knew who were identifying as that.
Hmm. So when you say that peer group, that would have been a peer group of kids that were, traditionally we would have said looked at as, you know, gay, lesbian, or bi, and that in but within that there was this kind of new categorization of non-binary and we'll say trans. And how did that, was that a confusion to you in terms of, you know, um your own sense of who you were?
There was one, it didn't confuse me personally, like, because the way it was explained to me by the people at the time, and it's funny, the people who explained it the most to me about gender dysphoria are now and claimed to experience gender dysphoria, and possibly they did. Um, they all have desisted from that, thankfully, before they started taking hormones or medically transitioning in any way. But they
Mhm.
explained it like about hating their bodies and feeling trapped. And at the time, I was going through my own body issues with eating disorders and self harm, and I'm well and truly clear of that and very much healed. But they were also experiencing that, so I could, as on top of the self self-diagnosed gender dysphoria, I will add that none of them had been diagnosed by a doctor with gender dysphoria, but it made sense the way they explained it to me.
And you had this commonality with the eating disorder, or, you know, possible eating disorder.
Yeah, like I was getting treatment or therapy for that, so I could understand like the
Yeah.
the body image issues. And then, but I knew, I've always known I'm very very feminine. I've never questioned my gender identity, so I know that there are people who do, and that's a hard thing to deal with. But
Hmm.
I never personally experienced it, and it never, even knowing them and them explaining it, it never made me question myself.
Hmm. And just for people listening, we're talking, I suppose Neve's 24, and so we're talking a period of time of 2014 into 2014 to 2016, when I suppose you were, if we do the maths, is maybe 16, 15, 16.
Yeah, I was 15, 16, 17 when I was kind of just realizing the possibility of me liking women,
Mm-hmm.
attracted to women. So I was like in my period of self discovery while also experiencing my own mental health issues. So it was a vulnerable time, um,
Mm-hmm.
especially for most teenage girls. 15, 16
Absolutely. Yeah.
rough is a rough time anyway, but add in questions of sexuality and all of the other things on top of it. So
And I suppose what we're talking, the expansion then into like identity questions. I suppose tell me if I'm right or wrong, but like, it seems a lot of the trans talk, I call it the trans ideology talk, is that, you know, explorations of your identity other than um, what's biological.
yeah, absolutely. It's like your teenage years are an exploration for kind of everything. You begin to question everything, including like religion, faith,
Hmm.
you know, your friendships, everything. So it makes sense that a lot of people would, when there's all of these things in the mix, might question their gender identity as well. Um, I'm luckily I never experienced that part of it, but it's just a typical age for people to question everything about themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I suppose, well, this takes us, you've got a broad peer group of maybe 16 to 20, or I think you said 16 there, who were basically talking, you know, identifying in some way as trans or non-binary. That then led you to, you know, going to, I guess, a meeting, a belong to meeting.
Yes, so when it would have been the end of 2015, 2016. I I ended up being in a relationship with one of the people who was identifying as trans at the time, as a trans man, boy, because we were
Mm-hmm.
children at the time. Um, she has since desisted. So I will refer to her as my ex-girlfriend because she's now identifying as a woman. But we she just brought me to belong to one day and said that, oh, there's other gay people here. It's like a gay youth club. And I was excited to meet more people who were bi women or lesbian, because
Mm-hmm.
I had a few a few friends in school who they're lesbian or bisexual women, but I was like, oh, like I'd like to have some people outside of school as well. Um, and it was framed to me that it was the the group that I attended was the Sunday group, which is for everyone in the LGBT community. And so I thought that it was going to be, a fairly balanced mix. And it just wasn't. And it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And the experience was not great, to say the least.
Yeah, and we might dive into that in just a minute, but
Yeah.
the age group at that meeting, we'll say, what was it? What was the age range?
It was 14 to 23, which is, in hindsight, at the time, I didn't clock that as weird because
You
I was
were.
17, and you're stupid when you're 17. Like, you just are a bit stupid.
Mhm.
But I've now realized how wrong that is, that there's 23-year-olds mixing with 14s to talk about sexuality.
Mhm.
That's
And
very
it could. Yeah, sorry, keep going.
To me, that's very strange that you'd have adults or even 18-year-olds mixing with 14-year-olds, but 23-year-olds mixing with 14-year-olds to talk about who they're sexually interested in is very worrying, in my opinion.
Well, if it was, we'll say heterosexual males and females in a group that was 14 to 23, you'd probably be in trouble.
Yeah, 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 there would be trouble. They would not have a group like that
Do you
asked for
know
it.
that? Yeah, and possibly rightly so. Um, I take it, and again, we are talking in a time period 2016. We need to be careful about this. But that was your first experience. You went to this group. Were there many at the group? And how was that laid out? Was it like laid out like a kind of um, an informal gathering, or was it everybody sitting around having, introducing themselves, or how did that work?
So each of the meetings that I went to were formatted similarly. I can't talk about the different groups that they have on different days, but the Sunday group, which was
Hmm.
everyone in the community, was, you'd go in, it was maybe 45 minutes to an hour where they'd it, I don't know what else to call it other than a mingling period, where there was tea and coffee and you'd just kind of hang out and introduce yourself to people. And then they'd have the topic or discussion, and there'd be two to three older adults that were kind of running it, or I don't even know what they named themselves, like what title they had, but like the leaders of the group, the
So
adults.
the adults, but were they like themselves part of the group, or were they? Did you get a sense they were part of part of the organization of the group?
I believe they could have. I think they're volunteers, and they
Mhm.
kind of they work with belong to, and hold the topic of the week or the discussion of the week. So after the 45 minutes to an hour where you'd hang out and just chat, then there'd be an actual topic that they'd talk about, or a theme for the week that they'd talk about.
And can you remember what that theme was, the first one or any of them?
Yeah, I think the whole first experience was very weird from start to finish. During the mingling period, I didn't know any of these people, and I was very new to the terminology of the the gender identity side of things. And
Hmm.
I was I went with my partner at the time, and she introduced me to someone who was trans identified, and I didn't catch the person's name, and I wasn't told that this person was trans identified. And I said, "Oh, what's his name again?" And I was shouted at by multiple people and then ignored by everyone bar my partner at the time. Um, Even though I apologized immediately, and I felt so guilty, which but I had no idea what I was doing, and I accidentally misgendered this person. And then once the actual topic starts, you're we were all sat down, and they ask everyone your name, your pronouns, your sexuality, and then a fact about yourself. And I was maybe the 16th person in the group to be asked, and every single person that spoke ahead of me had a pronoun that was not matching their sex.
Hmm.
And I was very uncomfortable because I was just
You didn't
I'm
want to be different.
yeah, because firstly
Hmm.
to announce how to a room of strangers and to two adults that you don't know how you
Hmm.
identify is weird. But it felt a lot like peer pressure, that I felt like I was going to be judged by everyone else because I was just going to say that I identify as a woman, because I did, or well, as a girl at the time, but that I'm just a woman, and I'm just at the time thought I was bisexual still. I was still figuring that part out, but that I
Hmm.
was a bisexual woman, and I wasn't I didn't have multiple pronouns.
Hmm.
Um so that was strange. And then it got onto the topic, and the leaders, or the youth workers, or whatever their actual title is, they started talking about coming out safely, and how um your parents might not agree with it, and that it could be dangerous, and your friends might disagree with you, and not like you, and it might not be safe, but the safe place was belonged to say. And that was a rhetoric that continued through all of the meetings that I went to, was that people outside are going to judge you. There's going to be people that hate you because of your sexuality. And even back then, I knew that that wasn't true. It was uh, I knew that the marriage equality was referendum was going to happen, and that everyone I knew was very much for, and as we know now,
Yeah.
landslide win.
Hmm.
Um, but I had never experienced, hate because of my sexuality. And I don't know anyone who has experienced real hate. I know it does happen, but real. And then they proceeded to talk about they talked about binding, chest binding. Um,
Well, just
for,
before we move on to that, Neve, I
yeah,
just want to ask you a quick question there. Is There's a sense I'm getting, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is you never felt because you were a lesbian or bi, or you were figuring out your sexuality, you never felt like a victim in your home, your home environment, or your school environment. Is that correct? In terms of, like, you weren't afraid of, by and large, of um, your sexuality as you were exploring it.
no, absolutely not. And like, not in school, not family, not friends.
It just seems to me that it there it seems to me from what you've said there, it's almost like people were trying to create that almost to create that environment where you should be afraid of people.
That's what it felt like. It definitely felt like belonged to, or not just the adults that were running the sessions, but the people within it then, who were teenagers,
Hmm.
well, were kind of, it was like it was creating its own, like in a little vacuum, that the outside world doesn't like us, that there's people that hate us and want to cause us harm because we aren't straight, or we're exploring our gender identity or whatever, and that it's dangerous out there, and the one place we can truly be safe is belong to, that we know we are safe.
I suppose this brings up a question, is because how much of that fear is based on trans and gender identity, and how much of it was based on actually being just, your sexuality, being a lesbian, a gay person, or bisexual. um like, what was the mix there? And like, I get very much the sense that trans and, we'll say, non identity were driving the bus, as opposed to this being a room full of young gay, lesbian, and bi people with one or two trans people in it.
Yeah, it was very, the the gender identity umbrella, the trans umbrella, was it was the dominant group
Okay.
while I was in belong to. And as I said, like, some of the 16 of the people that I knew
Hmm.
outside of belong to would have gone to belong to as well, but that was only some of them. Then there was the huge majority of the group was identifying as something. And every time that I went, the discussions, the actual topic of the week, was very much led by gender identity talk,
Hmm.
rather than lesbian was never mentioned, like, just normal
Hmm.
box. Lesbian was never mentioned. The only time it would be mentioned was the one time that I my last time in belong to, when it really clicked that that was not a group for me, was there was a biological male teenager who was identifying as a woman or a girl at the time, and he no longer does identify as that, so I will use he him pronouns. And he said that he was a lesbian, and the leaders of the group, he decided he was going to come out in the middle of belong to, in the middle of one of the discussions, as a lesbian. And all of the adults, the leaders of the group, looked around the room and tried to get us all to cheer, as if to try and get us to accept that.
Hold
uh,
on now a second here. You've got a Let me get my old head around this.
yeah.
You've got a biological male
Yes.
who was a trans woman,
Yeah.
and then the add-on then was that he was not only a trans woman, he was a lesbian trans woman.
Yes.
So, in layman's terms, he was a penis looking for a vagina still.
Yes.
And is that how you looked at it? That it was kind of like, that seems bonkers to me.
That's, yeah, because even when I was very much, you know, fighting for trans rights in a big way and getting into fights with my family members over it, and at the time my girl ex at the my ex
Hmm.
back then was identifying as a boy, um and I was all for whatever treatments and everything even then I knew that that was wrong. That
You sent,
it was just, how can you say that you're a lesbian when you have a penis?
yeah.
That's really offensive to
No, I-
actual lesbians, to, and then the adults expecting us to cheer for that,
yeah,
as if,
that's
as,
weird, like crazy.
as if the lesbians have to accept that person into our dating pool. Not to, obviously, no one's saying, oh yes, you have to go out with him, but
I think the term, we spoke about this maybe 5 or 6 months ago when we had a chat when I was writing an article, and um, I think the phrase you used at the time was you were asked to open your mind to these kind of relationships.
yeah, yeah, that you had to be open to it, and if you weren't, open to it, you were transphobic.
Oh, right. It went as far as that.
And the first, and that, around that same time, I think within a couple of weeks of that situation within Belong To, I was called transphobic for the first time, and I didn't even know what that, like, I didn't truly know what that meant.
Hmm.
Because there was a Facebook interaction where someone said something about a male who was claiming to be a lesbian, and I said, well, no, lesbians are same, it's same sex attraction, it's nothing got to do with your gender identity. That's what pansexual or bisexual, like, that's a different thing. Lesbian is same sex attraction.
Hmm.
And I was called a transphobe for the first time, when,
Hmm.
and I couldn't believe it. I was like, no, I'm not.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I have I'm friends with all of these trans identified people, and
Hmm.
I know what a lesbian is. I know what the definition of a lesbian is. How does that make me transphobic? And it's because I wasn't allowing
You
people
weren't.
who, biological males, into lesbian space or into the dating pool. I said, no, that's not how that works. You can't identify into lesbianism as a biological male. I
Well, it seemed, unless you're just go back to being a heterosexual male who's attracted to females, or was that actually, no, that's not correct. Um, what was your thinking around? What's your thinking now about that? Because I take it this person wasn't done. This person wasn't. This person wasn't planning on removing his appendages, or was he, or whatever?
So he was one of the 16, actually, that, like, when I say in my circle of friends, friends of friends are included in that. So he was just a friend of a friend.
Hmm.
And at the time, and all of them were fully, they so firmly believed it, that they were transgender or non-binary, and lots of them were thinking of, going on hormones, and were actively seeking it, and some of them made it onto waiting lists, and then they realized after a few months that they weren't. Most of them, it finished after a year, but at the time, I think, yeah, he was like looking into how those surgeries work, and what ways to go about it, and how you fund it, and all of that. But now he identifies as a man again. So
And
that,
and I'm just curious, for my own curiosity, and if he's identifying as a man again, i- what's his, is he same sex attracted or is he opposite sex attracted? Do you know
I
now?
think I think he's bisexual.
Okay, okay. um, it's as you can see, as I'm going through here. My apologies for the way I'm probably not. using the terminology correctly. But I can see how a person's mind and head could be spinning in 15 different directions without trying to absorb all this stuff. Um, how many of the group? It sounds to me is this correct that a young 14 or 15-year-old gay boy or girl is being encouraged to adopt a gender identity and kind of almost lay aside their the sexual whether it's same sex attraction or bisexuality to kind of give up that label to adopt a suite of other ones, or is that fair to say?
Yeah, so definitely. So my both of my best friends, one of them he's a gay man, but at the time, the belong to days, he was non-binary or gender fluid. It was using they he was using they them pronouns at the time. I can't remember which exactly kind of middle gender identity he had assumed at the time, but he's very flamboyant. He's like a very effeminate gay, and there's no denying that he's just a gay man. And he he had been introduced to belong to, I don't know by who, but someone that we knew, and he started going on a few sessions in just because he wore kind of quirky, more androgynous clothing, um similar to Prince back in the 80s.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Now you're talking my language.
he he was wearing just a bit more, androgynous clothing, and someone said, "Oh no, I think you might be gender fluid or non-binary," because and when he started going, he would have been 14, I think, 14 or 15. Like he was younger than me, definitely, when he started going, and had just realized that he was gay and or interested in men.
Mhm.
Similar situation in figuring out his sexuality, and he just then, for I think it was maybe 2 full years, that he was fully convinced that he was non-binary. Um, uh,
Now I just have a quick question there, while I think of it. So what you're saying to me is they looked at him because he was this flamboyant dresser
yeah,
and a feminist kind of male, a ty used that as a kind of labeled him, because of that, used it kind of to say, look, because you look like this, dress like this, are like this, you're not actually gay. You're you should maybe look at non-binary as an option.
yeah, that's because
And is that the same for, we'll say, a lesbian, like a woman who's maybe more masculine in, character, or, like a tomboy? Um, is that was it your experience that they would also, the opposite kind of, maybe stereotype, you might say, of, you know, a, a butch kind of lesbian? Was it your experience they were also getting that kind of it's almost targeting?
absolutely, like, it's just I'm trying to like figure out how to say it without going
You
off in a tangent, but
go ahead, go in any direction you want.
yeah, anyone who was even bisexual people, but anyone who was gender non-conforming, as in that they didn't fit a stereotype of, oh, you're a woman but you don't wear skirts or dresses, you don't like dresses, you prefer, like, what back when I was in primary school, back in the early 2000s, would have just been called a tomboy.
Hmm.
And maybe you're attracted to women, you're bisexual or you're a lesbian. There's it was this narrative that no, you're probably not. You're probably a man trapped in a woman's body because you prefer to have your hair shorter and you never liked wearing dresses. And then the same for the gay
Yeah.
or the gay or bi men who didn't like playing football or the more stereotypical boy things. And then the
Hmm.
craziest part about it was the during those days, like everyone in Belong To was saying about, oh, we have to break gender stereotypes, we should be allowed to do whatever. But then the second that you weren't the stereotype, you were told, no, you're probably trans. You're probably not the sex that you were born as. You're probably a trans person because
So
you did.
they were actually stereotyping the people themselves based on them being this effeminate male or maybe butch female, and using it to encourage them to go down a different avenue, as opposed to being, you can be a tomboy, heterosexual or bisexual or
Yeah,
gay. It's just, but it seems like they're almost using the thing in this instance, from what you're saying, is stereotyping of people in the group was a kind of utilized to usher them down a particular identity, to encourage them down a gender identity path.
yeah, absolutely. And the then when someone did come out as a different gender identity within the group, then that would be really, really celebrated. That was the thing. It was like, for me, every the mingling session, I would be ignored except for the people that I had gone to the meeting with, who'd
Hmm.
asked me to go. Like, people wouldn't talk to me. Um include like And I was ignored by the leaders as well, the adults. Like, they just kind of brushed me off. But then the second that someone would come out as whatever gender identity that they were announcing that they were, hugely celebrated, and everyone was all over them. They were like the coolest person ever. And
Hmm.
obviously that was not, the leaders weren't doing that much, but they didn't, they weren't paying attention to other people either. So it was more
Hmm.
encouraged, like that behavior and mentality was encouraged by the adults.
So if you were a kid exploring all this, and you came out as you described as a bog standard lesbian,
Yeah.
nobody was getting too excited about that.
Oh no, like that was completely ignored. That, like, if you were just a bog standard lesbian, born a woman, still a woman, just a lesbian, you you weren't you weren't important, you weren't special,
Hmm.
no one cared. But the second that the biological male came out as lesbian, the whole group would be expected to clap and cheer and celebrate it.
That is that is quite something.
Yeah.
Um, sorry, trying to wrap my head around how that could be. Um, there's a couple of I suppose there's a couple of things I want to ask you.
Fire away.
At this point, is you mentioned, and I kind of interrupted you there. It seems to me, and tell me what you think, is this whole gender exploration
Yeah.
is making a lot heavier asks on women, young girls, than it is on young boys, in terms of some of the things that you're shown how to do. And I think you were about to go into it there, about stuff like taping up your chest and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. The So I So during the summer, I don't know if we were speaking before or after I had met with the children's ombudsman. Some of your listeners might have read it. Niall or what's his name? In the Sunday Independent, there was an article about it. There was a meeting with the Children's Ombudsman in
Okay.
July in 2022, and I was involved in that. I was at that meeting, and it was a
Okay.
group of young people who had experienced, who were lesbian, bi, or gay, and one of the attendees who was actually discussed in that article um, had previously identified as a trans boy, but she is a 14-year-old girl with autism, and she it was a very interesting conversation with Dr. Niall Muldoon, but he was quite shocked with what I had to say about the state funded charity youth group I've belonged to. And they
Okay.
but the thing was, it was all about the ways that the girls in the group who were trans identified at the time, or still are, like the females who were identifying as trans, what they could do to um bind their chest. That was in the first meeting, that was the one of the topics that they touched on, how you could get a hold of a chest binder to flatten your chest, which is extremely damaging to the breast
Hmm.
tissue, and your breathing. But they the adults were telling girls as young as 14 how they could purchase them and how they could hide them from their parents without their parents seeing it in their laundry, or how they could get it delivered to someone else's house. And I checked it just before we got on this call. It's still on their website. They still say that they don't promote binding, but I fail to understand how that's not promotion within the group of how to hide it from your parents and how to purchase it.
Well, there's a few problems there. Anything, at any stage, is it encouraged that these teenagers or young adults bring their parents along to educate them? Like, everything sounds like, in your experience, and I have to reiterate, we're talking about um 4 or 5 years ago, but everything sounds like hiding, don't say anything to your parents. At The whole idea of this journey would be to try and um, be comfortable enough to say these things out to your parents. So, was there any kind of talk about how to, to include parents in this process?
No, not in the sessions that I was at, and I can't speak for, maybe
Hmm.
maybe that was discussed in times that I didn't attend meetings, but
You'd
no,
never heard of anyone bringing their parents to a meeting or anything like
oh
that. So,
no, no one brought their parents ever. Not that I know of, brought their
mhm,
parents. It was just for the teenagers, and there was these people who were 25 plus, who were the the people there on behalf of Belong to kind of lead the session, but
mhm,
no one brought their parents. And though, in my experience, there was no discussion of, being able to discuss these issues with your parents. It was, your parents might not agree with you, or they might not like that, or they might not believe you, they might not trust you.
So it's just way, like, now there might be many cases where that's true, but it's not. It's like the idea that the idea of encouraging a wedge to be put between parents and kids at a that an age, the adolescent years are troublesome for everyone, and to lesser and greater degrees, isn't doesn't sound like a recipe for success.
Yeah, no, like, in now that I like, over the years, then, I moved away from Dublin for a while, and so I just wasn't in contact with the people from Belong To, and I had broken up with that
Hmm.
ex that had introduced me to Belong To, so I wasn't in contact with a lot of these people. And then I just started to think back on all of all of it, the whole situation, and I was like, that's really weird that the adults would be telling, like, it was kind of creating this fear around telling parents or telling friends or people outside, and
Hmm.
the fact that you might have to hide your chest binder in
Hmm.
your washing, or ways to do it. Like, I can't remember the exact way, but it was like hiding it in a t-shirt or something,
Hmm.
that you could, ways to hide it when you're doing your laundry. And
Hmm.
oh, if your parents do the laundry for you, because we're talking about 14-year-olds,
Hmm.
that maybe the parents are the ones doing the laundry, what you could do, and it was like, wash it in the sink or wash it in the bath so that they don't see it separate from the rest of your clothes.
Hmm. And we're the same demand, like we're talking about a situation where basically young adolescents are being encouraged to hide the natural growth of their breasts or and their body. Was the same was the same advice being given to young boys about their, genitalia?
No, not that I witnessed. No, they were not told
So
any.
there,
They there was no conversation of, wearing, even, oh, you should wear makeup or anything. And the 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 lesbian, um the biological male who was identifying as lesbian and came out in the middle of a session, as a lesbian, he had facial hair and everything when he did that. Like, there
hmm.
was no, this is how you pass, which is, I don't know if the listeners will know that terminology, but passing as the opposite gender. Uh,
Okay. There was
there
no
was
even attempt at that.
no, there was not. I don't think any that I can think of. Maybe there was one or two, given how long ago it was. Maybe like pointers on how you could pass better as a woman, but it was, any discussion about passing or, like, presenting yourself was all based around the females that were identifying as trans.
Ma-
It was
and
what they,
not the male and not the males identifying as females.
yeah, and like what things you could do to change your body or like hide things on your body, which, considering, and because I was going through an eating disorder myself, I
Hmm.
could see very obviously who else in the group, and every single one of the trans identified females, like, that, whether they were non-binary or saying that they were trans men, every single one of them was extremely underweight, suffering from some sort of food eating related issue, and self-harm, um
Okay.
very, like, active self-harming. And but they were not being given supports for that through the group, or even being recommended, oh, if you're experiencing this on top of the gender identity issue, there was no discussion of you should get that, help for that as well. um it was all just, oh no, you should do things to affirm your gender, not, you should also maybe talk to someone about your self-harm issue
Hmm.
and all of that. And looking back, one of the most obvious things for how it was more about females changing their body was a session where there was three workers for Belong To in the session. And at the start, after we were all forced to say our pronouns and our sexuality in front of the whole group, then a biological female who identifies as a trans man had announced that this person announced that they had been given a confirmation of a date for their top surgery to have a double mastectomy, which is glamorized within Belong To and the LGBT community in general as top surgery, so it doesn't sound
Hmm. What
as
it is.
as extreme as a double mastectomy, which is what it actually is. And got and announced this to this group of children who are experiencing eating disorders and self-harm and other identity issues, and explained how they funded it. And the other two adults, the two leaders of the session, this was another situation where they got the group to cheer and kind of looked and clapped to try and get us all to really celebrate this moment that this person was going to be getting a double mastectomy.
Yeah.
And they're like celebrating the removal of healthy
Hmm.
body parts in children who are experiencing issues with their body is really scary now when I look back that there was these adults. Because then, and this is one of the things I talk about online, because I experienced, like, because I had an eating disorder in those years, if I had gone to my GP and said, oh, I think my thighs are fat, and the GP turned around and said, yes, they are fat, we are going to get you liposuction,
Hmm.
no one would stand for that. No one would celebrate it. Everyone would say, get that doctor locked up. What are they
Hmm.
doing?
Hmm. And it leads me to a question, in terms of, and I suppose, I want to try and ask it kind of as gently as possible
Mhm.
about your experience there, and I'm interested to know, is that, is counseling offered as a bar, or as an option to people in the first instance, to say, because everybody in the group seems to be self-identifying themselves as trans or non-binary. Is there, you know, and what, from what I can hear you saying there, is nearly all of the group you were in had some sort of other issues, whether it was eating disorders, you mentioned somebody that had autism. Um, was there like like counseling or talk about whether they somebody was saying that they were trans and that they weren't actually trans? Was that question ever asked at the beginning, in terms of how to establish, whether what you're thinking is real dysphoria, or whether it's kind of just something else?
So I know that Belong To does work with therapists, but there's never a question of, is this genuine gender dysphoria or is it just body dysmorphia, which, uh, especially now, and it's getting worse. I know the statistics have shown that it's more prevalent, more and more prevalent, that teenage girls in particular are experiencing body image issues to the point of eating disorders, where they,
Mhm.
like, and they can't really tell if they are overweight or not, and it's a skewed image in their brain and they hate their bodies, whatever. And that's, no, if these teenagers 14-year-olds, like, that's so crazy that we're
Mhm.
just letting teenagers self-diagnose with like with gender dysphoria, like that they're self-diagnosing, and all of them were like, none of them had gone to a GP and been told, yeah, you are experiencing gender dysphoria. They all just decided they were. And and fair enough, some of them might have been, but no, if that's what they said that they were experiencing, it was never questioned in Belong To. You absolutely were transgender. I know that they do work with counseling, but it's more for just they're you can't question it though. And I know now, like subsequent, since I've come out and talked about belong to online, I've talked to people who used to work with belong to, and or know people who still work with belong to, who've asked about the people who, you know, desisted from it, who just turned out to be lesbian or gay,
Hmm.
or bisexual. Predominantly with it was girls who were identifying as well, and there's no support for those people, and they're like, to, you know, to help them with the pressure that's then put on them to, when they say, oh no, I'm actually not trans, I was just confused, I was dealing with other things, I'm actually just a lesbian. There's no support for those people within belong to, and belong to continues to say that barely anyone detransitions or desists from it. When
And your experience of your peer group, going back to the beginning of that 16 or whatever it was, you said,
yeah,
I think you said now today only three of those are identifying as trans. Did I hear that
yeah,
right?
only three, which makes it 81.25% exactly detransitioned or desisted. That none of them had started transitioning. Thank God they didn't, before, like, start taking hormones or anything, before they realized that that was not for them. So they desisted from that identity thing. But the 82, 81, 82%
Hmm.
stop.
And I can give you a statistic, and I just want to give it. I've been going through Belong To's 2021 annual report, and they have a stat on it. Of course, it's a poll or it's a survey they've done. And just pulled it up here. Of course, they don't say how many's in it, or what the cohort is really, but it says it's a poll. It's a poll from the 2021 annual report, which is interesting to read. Does gender identity match sex assigned at birth? And they're saying 35% of people are saying no to that question in the LGBT, I assume the LGBTQ community, which would be a worrying statistic if that was to be mapped out to the, you know, are we to believe that 35, 35% of the LGBTQ community do not um, um, identify with their biological sex?
But that's, that, like, to me that's crazy.
Hmm.
I don't even know if that's actually crazy now that I'm thinking about it out loud, just from my experience since then, and since my realization that, you know, it's actually okay to say that biological males cannot be lesbian,
Hmm.
and I firmly believe that, and
Well,
I
like it's absolutely bonkers to say, like a, a biological man is a lesbian in my mind. You know, there to say, to be worried about saying that out loud. If that's the country we are, we're in a big, we have a country with big problems. If that's, if you can't come out and stand up against something like that.
yeah, well, I've, like, I me and my friend that I mentioned earlier, the gay man, we would be of the same mindset, and he came out of belong to, obviously, like, he at the time identified as non-binary, and he came out the other side of belong to, and the two of us have experienced, like, real, like, we've been called fascists, we've been called bigots,
Hmm.
because he says the same, and he talks about the issue as well, but more so because of what lesbians are having to deal with, because he as a gay man is not called a bigot so much for saying no, a biological female cannot be a gay man. He doesn't experience it the same way that I
Mhm.
do,
Mhm.
the opposite way around. And he is he came to me and said lesbians are being erased from the LGBT umbrella. They're being told to shut up. They're being told that they're bigots, that they're fascists, that they're transphobic for not accepting biological males into their spaces. And
Mhm.
it's I've lost female friends within the community because I've said no, lesbianism is same-sex attraction, it's homosexuality, it's not nothing to do with your gender identity. I don't care how you identify. I'm not attracted to people who are born with a penis. I don't
Mhm. No, no,
care.
no. Like absolutely. Um, Let me ask you a question. We have a minister for children that is Roderick O'Gorman,
Ugh.
and we also have, you know, belong to spending this year. Our revenue this year is for the end of 2021
Mm,
was over 2.2 million. It was up 50 or 60% on 2020. When you look at the report, when you look at the organization, it's very much looks today. It mightn't have been like that when you were there, like a corporate NGO. It's got all the best solicitors. It's got like Google funds it. There's 40% government grants, government funding, but like a plethora of grants from different departments, the HSC, Department of Children, other ones too.
mhm.
Um, Let me ask you this. Theoretically, we've never lived in a better environment for LGBTQ. Has Would you prefer to be coming out as a lesbian today as a 16-year-old or to come out 10 years ago when you did when you first had um when you were first exploring your sexuality? Do you think things are better today or worse?
Worse.
And why
Um,
do you think they're worse?
because it it's so hard to just put your foot down now. Like as a the thought of me when I was like going through my own mental health issue when I was a teenager, to
Hmm.
have to face what I do now, and the fact that I can't, I can't show my face, I can't
Hmm.
say who I really am. And there's been so many times over the last number of years where I've thought, okay, no, I'm gonna do it, but I can't because I risk losing my job. I risk
And just to be clear, you're not afraid, as you mentioned, fascists and bigots and all that, and I get called far right, fascist, bigots, and all the other lovely labels. You're not fair. It's not me you're afraid. It's not people like me that are causing your fear.
no.
It, it
And even in the meeting with Dr. Niall Muldoon, the children's ombudsman, he asked a very similar question about, do I experience like do I experience the same level of, you know vitriol from heterosexual people or people who aren't within the LGBT plus community. And everyone at the table said, every single one of us who was in the community said no. I've never I've never experienced anything like that from the general public. I
Mhm,
only get called those names by people who are within the community, particularly the TQIA plus.
mm, mhm,
And he was speechless. Genuinely, he didn't know how to respond because he couldn't believe that lesbians or bisexual women in particular. As I said, my gay male friend does not experience
yeah.
this. And my friend can say outrageous things online, and he gets like, and be very blunt and just call shit out about all of this, and he doesn't get any of that. He might get a few people who unfollow him
Mhm,
online, but he doesn't get attacked. I post something and I'm called I may as well be Hitler. Um, recently on Twitter, I was told I should kill myself. Like, just because I said that biological males cannot be lesbians, and I've been told to kill myself, that I should die, that I deserve all of this, I that I'm going to die alone. Like,
Well, yeah,
and
it's like
all are meant to be in the community, not so much of a community, if you ask me. Like,
yeah. So where do you go when you're if you like, when you're ejected from the machine? Where do you go? Like, what's your social life like? What's the social scene like in Dublin for somebody that's 24 and a lesbian, and that's all, you know? And that, I don't mean that's all, but like that's it. The
yeah, I
is
don't have the any extra parts of my identity.
yeah.
I'm just trying to live my life, and I also happen to be a lesbian.
Hmm.
Um, we go to, like, we aren't huge fans of the gay bars anyway in Dublin, just because they're very male, like gay man heavy, and that's
Hmm.
a little bit intense for me. I'm also not like into nightclubs as much, so the George and, you
Hmm.
know, the other, like, Straight 66 and stuff would not be really my scene in general. But we would just usually go to the pub, and then I have my few group, like my small group of friends, and I'm happy enough with that. Like, then we'd just go to the pub and chat, or go to, a quieter bar slash nightclub. But
And
that would not be based around your sexuality. There's
it'd be
no
just, yeah, it'd be just
a general bar that's
yeah,
just a
absolutely.
bar.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's the, like, a lot of the hate seems, from just listening to you there, a lot of bile is seems to be generated online, and I'm curious as if you're saying, what's the online dating for a bog standard lesbian like today?
My God, it is a war zone out here. It's so it's so bad. I I I'm sure that you saw the thread that I did recently, on my Twitter, about the
I saw all
just
these. Well, well, it looks to me like the men identifying as women or trans women. Um, are they? Are they? Is that what you're talking about?
yeah, just like, because I have been single for now. I was in a 5-year long relationship previously, and
Hmm.
that ended for completely unrelated to anything about this. But
Hmm.
um about 10 to 12 months ago, I'm gonna say. And then after a while, once I, came out of the breakup phase, and I was like, oh God. And I had, because we got together when we were so young, I had
Hmm.
never had to use dating apps or anything. And I know the last time I was speaking to you, it was fresher than it is now, the breakup, and me
Hmm.
being a single
Hmm.
person in this climate. And um so I went on the dating apps, and I knew that I'd heard that it was bad, but I didn't think it would be that bad. And I knew it was bad, just like with the hookup culture, and that it was going to be difficult anyway. But then there was all just like, you set so say Tinder, you can set your preferences to men, women, or everyone. And obviously I have mine set to only women. And then there's it's about 50-50 on the dating apps. Biological men either identifying as women or non-binary, or just normal, like, bog standard man who has set himself as a woman to get into
My God.
to be shut to show up as like there's far too many of them to just be a couple of accidents where they hit the wrong button on the app. Also, they're in their 20s. There's no way that they act this many accidentally.
Hmm.
It's intentional that they're setting it so that women who are interested in women are being shown men. um and then on Hinge you have there's an extra category, so there's men, women, non-binary, or everyone. And obviously again I only have women, and I'm shown non-binary, biological men,
Hmm.
men who identify as women, and the same thing with the just men who are trying to get into our spaces anyway.
Hmm.
And
And do you feel like this whole, as this goes on, do you feel there's an agenda? You know, do you look on this what's going on as a kind of some sort of ideology that's being ushered in, or is that too sinister a turn to look at it? Because it seems to me a lot of this seems to be about erasure of women, biological, like kind of an attack on them. And I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts as to if that's true, A, and B, as to why you think that might be?
it's certainly how it feels when, you know, when there's all of these like the dating apps just is the tip of the iceberg. But just so I'd been on the dating apps for a couple of months on and off, and I would delete them. And this is like, I know that most people just like delete them and then go back on them, because it's just, the dating
Mhm.
apps are a lot to deal with in normal circumstances. Even my straight female friends are constantly deleting and re-downloading because it's just a lot. But then I just got sick of it, and I was like, I can't, like, this is ridiculous. Why am I having to be expected to? And obviously I'm not swiping right and saying yes to these people, like these biological
Mhm.
men. But I was told, like, the response was that I was a fascist and that I had to shut up and I should kill myself for saying no to this. And it's the same across the board when a woman is putting her foot down nowadays to a biological man, regardless of how that biological
Mhm.
man identifies. Women have to shut up or they're a bigot. And in women are kind of conditioned to, you know, be nice and not not piss people not piss everyone off. And we certainly don't want to be called fascists or right wing
Mhm.
or similar to Nazis, or that we are, this is the activists' words from the internet, not mine, that we are genociding people by our words online on Twitter. Apparently that's genociding people um who are trans identified. But like, we don't want to be told that, so a lot of women then back down and they just accept it.
Would you have concerns about a 14-year-old girl that was going in to, and I won't just say that organization, but all of these LGBTQI kind of state-funded, NGO-backed,
Yeah,
um, would you be worried about her?
yeah, I'd be questioning, like, do her parents know? Does does anyone know what's happening? I would be worried that she'd end up my, like, my my best friend who's a straight woman,
Hmm.
like, she and has always been a straight woman, very comfortable in that, but had gone with my gay friend who at the time identified as whatever, because he dressed a little bit like Prince.
Hmm.
And she just went as, like, because no one else was there to go with him those days. And he said, oh, will we pop in for a few minutes and see if anyone is there that I know? And she went 3 sessions in because she would dress a little bit more androgynous and not, she wasn't going around wearing dresses and skirts and
Hmm.
preferred to wear like baggier clothing, she's more of a tomboy. Um, she was suddenly, after 3 sessions, identifying as gender fluid, non-binary.
So this is a lady who just went in and was straight and um to support her gay friend or whatever he was identified as. So she went to three of these and she suddenly took on the non-binary identity.
Yeah, because she didn't fit the stereotype of, oh, girls wear dresses. And
So they
so,
managed to convince her that there was something mixed up in her identity because she was doing that. That indicated she had an identity problem.
yeah, because she was told, not by the adults, but like by people in the group, that, oh, you prefer to wear trousers and you wear Doc Martens. Maybe you're non-binary. And then that pressure was built, and lots of people were saying like, oh yeah, you're probably non-binary, you know you're probably not a woman because you don't wear dresses, you prefer to wear comfortable clothing. um you're probably not a woman.
And she's probably at those three meetings has seen not saying this affected her, but you're seeing the rewards that's given for people that come out with an
Exactly.
identity that goes against their biological sex. There's an obvious reward between, people clapping, people jumping up and down.
The celebration of it, that you
Hmm.
get attention when you do that, and that was when she was 15 as well. So I
So it sounds like it all leads to people that are it sounds to me people that are confused about, are figuring out their sexuality and bits and pieces, they end up more confused. People who weren't confused end up confused.
yeah, because like, going back to the question that you asked about, like a 14-year-old lesbian or bisexual girl going in, yes, I'd be
You'd be
I'd
worried about them actually
I'd be
considering.
I'd be so worried, but I'd be so worried about any 14-year-old girl going in, regardless of how like how
Hmm.
her sexuality, because as unless she's like, well, even if she is very feminine and likes to wear skirts and dresses, like, there's a risk. But any any 14-year-old girl who prefers to wear like baggy trousers and oversized t-shirts, or a pair of docs, and has her hair a little bit shorter, mm,
Hmm.
she when you're 14, you're very vulnerable to influences, especially when adults are telling you that that's a
Hmm.
possibility. I'd be
Yeah.
very, very concerned.
Now, I do think from their website, and at the moment, I don't know, is that it seems to suggest on the websites nowadays that the under 18s and the over 18s are split. But that certainly wasn't your experience when you were attending their meetings, those Sunday meetings.
No, and um I don't know if that's what it said at the time, because I never really looked up the website. But
Hmm.
then other people I've talked to who attended before and since, not in the last couple of years, no one I know has attended in the last couple of years, because we've all aged out or
Hmm.
realized how not good for us it was. But they all it was always there was always people who would still come, regardless of if they said, oh no, it's for,
So there was people that were, and would they generally be people that were over the age?
there was a few people who were 19 plus. When
Mm.
any meeting that I attended, and I was 17 at the time, there was people who were 19, 20. I think the eldest was 22.
Mhm.
But then there was people who were 14.
Mhm.
in those sessions as well.
And that, yeah, yeah. You described yourself. How you described at one point you got in, like, you as a trans radical activist, kind of, that you actually did get consumed with, um, you know, championing and being on the street kind of thing for trans rights. Can you explain a little bit about how that developed and how you kind of might have snapped out of it then?
So because the person I was going out with at the time was identifying as a man, um so she, like, there would be lots of conversations about that, and then like the other people that I knew who were trans identified, so there'd be lots of conversations about that, like about transitioning and the how hard it is, and um how it's not fair, like, and bear in mind we're all children, uh
Hmm.
so it's just like blind leading the blind, and just regurgitating stuff that we've been told by people online, um talking about how it's not fair that there's waiting lists, it's not fair that, you know, that you'd have to go to a GP to get a diagnosis before you get hormones or chop bits off your body, um which, and I was fully consumed by it, and I don't know how to even justify it now. Like, I'm so shocked at myself at the like 180 that I have done in regards to it, because I don't even fully understand how it happened that I was so blind to everything and was fully on board with that. But I would fight with my mom all the time, um about it, and being like, no, you're being, and I would say the same things that I'm being told now, and like I wouldn't tell her to, you know, that she deserves to die or anything like that, but I'd tell her that she was being like a really horrible person, and she sounded like a right wing person
Hmm.
because she didn't agree that, you know, a man could be a woman, or that a woman could be a man,
Hmm.
and
Um,
I
where,
was so angry. I'd get so angry about it, like and I don't know how or when it happened, but like my whole life suddenly was consumed with being like, no, we have to, children, like teenagers, should be allowed to take hormones even though they can't legally consent to sex, um or, you know, legally enter a contract or anything like that. No, they should be allowed to take, like,
hormone blockers or whatever it might be, or
blo-
whatever.
blockers that can make you infertile. Like, that's insane that there's even a question. And back to your question about Roderick O'Gorman, he, and the funding thing, um he funds belong to, or like his department has funded belong to in recent years, according to the audit reports. And like he pushes for this idea that, no, we should make it younger, that children should be able to access, I'm saying children, but like teenagers
Hmm.
under the age of consenting to sex, um should be allowed to take hormones and puberty blockers, or even surgeries, um but the age of consent has not changed. It's 17 in this country. How can you consent to chemically castrating yourself, which is what it is? That's what it is. If you decide then that if you realize you're not trans after, then you probably are not going to ever be able to have children. But you're able to decide that, like, you're able to take those chemicals before you can even consent to having sexual intercourse. Like, that doesn't make sense.
No, no, but sure, so much of it doesn't,
And then
unfortunately.
Roderick O'Gorman as well, like, the funding thing, money was taken from the Magdalene Laundry by thing
Yeah,
recently that came out that money was actually not used, that was meant budgeted for the Magdalene Laundry
yeah, and travelers groups and
and
yeah, jigged
group,
around.
given directly to Tenny and belong to and other LGBT related charities, and the like why?
Hmm.
And then during the week he was over for the EU like conference about women's rights. He was the speaker when he swapped money around. It's just I don't know what is going on, but I really like I don't even know what to say about it. I'm stunned.
Yeah. Well, well, if you're stunned, I'm even more stunned by some of the things that you've brought up there. But I remember as well, like this idea, because one of the, I wrote an article after we spoke the first time, and it was called something. It was called Bogland Tricks and Lady Dicks. So
Yeah.
this concept, I think it was you that introduced me to this concept of a lady dick and furries and all this stuff. What was this? Is this stuff that happened outside of those meetings, or is this just general? Where did you encounter this kind of terminology and these kind of identities as well?
So the it's actually more common, the more aggressive use terminology for a penis of cock, that it's a lady cock, which is just like the most disgusting thing. Like,
So is this part of the kind of coercion of traditional lesbians? Like I assume that the lady dick is the kind of is this a concept where a man is identifying as a woman and is identifying as a lesbian then as well, or is this something different?
yeah, it's part of that, that it's like I've seen articles written in like women's magazines, you know, the women's magazines that talk about, that have always traditionally talked about like sexual stuff, like um I don't know, like how to get your man to fancy you or whatever, like just
Hmm.
normal magazine nonsense. And in the last year, I've seen them refer to, firstly referring to women, or the changing the definition of lesbian to non-men who are attracted to non-men. So now lesbians are defined as how we are not men rather than how we are women, which is
Hmm.
like just insane in the first place. And then talk I've seen articles written, I can't remember what magazine, I think it was like Hello, they have an online magazine, I think maybe they have a print version as well, but they referring to a lady dick or a lady cock, that it's no different than a normal vagina, and it can still like, it's just the same thing, like if you just change your mindset on it.
Hmm. Really interesting. Um, and did you come across did this concept of people identifying as furry animals, was that something that came up in Belong to?
um yes, towards the end of my belong to era, they there was one person who did identify as, I think it was a rodent of some sort. It wasn't the usual wolf or fox that is more commonly seen within the furry
Hmm.
community. But this person was identifying as a rodent, and the same gay friend had said something online completely separate from belong to, just about how, what, like made a comment on Facebook saying how can like identifying as an animal has nothing got to do with being gay or lesbian or bisexual. Why are we being
Mm-hmm.
grouped together? Why are we being put in the same group? And he was forced to apologize. Someone reported him on Facebook to, like, screenshot it, sent it to Belong To, and Belong To made him apologize to the person within the group um for the comment that he made, completely unrelated, not directed towards that person at all, just a general Facebook post, and banned him from the group. He was no longer allowed to attend Belong To because of something he said on Facebook about how furry people are not the same.
So did you ever sense that your social media kind of critical voices on social media were being monitored and reported, obviously in this case reported back to Belong To?
Yeah, so I never, like, I would never say anything on my Facebook page now. Not that it would be reported now to Belong To, because I've aged out of Belong To's bracket, because
Hmm.
I'm old now. I'm too old for Belong To, but um yeah, no, I never would have said anything critical about anything.
For
It'd be
fear of, yeah, yeah.
for fear of anyone, not even just that it would be reported to Belong To, but that other people would say it to people in Belong To, and that I'd be ostracized. And now I don't care about being ostracized. Like, I don't care anymore. So
Okay. Well, that's good. Well, I mean, it's good and not. It's good that you're comfortable enough to express your opinions freely. I suppose, and that's the way it should be. Like, I'm very upset to hear that you think things have gone backwards and in the last 10 years, and a lot of it has to do not with the general attitudes in society, but actually the the structure and organization of the LGBTQ community itself. Um, what do you think? What would you like to see to happen in the future?
um I think, like, not I think one of the most important things is to not force this thing, like, this whole thing into schools first and foremost. Because the most important thing is about protecting children, and, like, teenagers are mentally more vulnerable because they're in that phase of questioning everything. So not having things being taught as fact in school, being, like, there's no problem talking about it, but having it on a curriculum and stating that it's fact, or, forcing people to announce their pronouns is a problem, because it's like then it becomes an othering thing if you don't, if you accidentally misgender someone, which I've experienced from the get-go when I went to Belong To.
Hmm.
Completely accidental, even though, like, I was all for it back then, and it was an honest mistake, and I
Hmm.
still got othered. But then, just, like, allowing people to wear what they want and dress how they want, without it being, if they don't conform to a gender stereotype of, oh, say, like, more butch lesbians, or just tomboy women, regardless of their sexuality,
Hmm.
not being told, like, oh, you must be gender fluid, or you must be, like, a non-binary or a man. To just allow people to wear what they want, and without it being a big issue. And most importantly, gay and lesbian people being allowed to have their boundary of only being attracted to their own sex, because that's what it is, and we're not bigots for it.
Hmm.
That's what it has turned into in the last 10 years. It wasn't that when I was 14 at all. because at that stage it was still, oh no, gender is different from sex, and and now it's being, the two of them are being, that line is being blurred now, and we're being told that we have to accept the gender identity of woman rather than female.
Hmm. And it almost trumps it trumps female. It trumps biological female, the gender female. Like we'll say this identity of female. Um, it seems to me anyway. Um, it would be, yeah. It's just trying to think. Is there anything we didn't cover here, Niamh? Because we've covered a lot. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that I might be too stupid to ask?
Trying to think, is there anything else?
I'm just curious, while you're thinking of that, I have a question thought in my head is there a worry that the classroom becomes almost an extension of the chaos that's in some of these, these community rooms? Is that suddenly it's almost it's almost an extension of that in terms of everybody's now talking about everybody that previously didn't, kids that don't have any issue, or it's not a question for them about their, their gender, their sexuality, that now it's everybody's a question, and there's a rewards that the template seems to be a reward system where if you
Yeah.
don't conform, there's a reward there for you.
Yeah, it is a concern. It's of huge concern. Like, I have siblings who are still in school, and firstly, belong to, is going round to schools in Ireland giving talks. They're also involved in creating like information packs that are sent out to secondary schools in this country, and there has been attempts, although they've been stopped because of complaints from parents who are aware of the issues it belong to get them in
Mhm.
primary schools. But I don't know how many of your listeners might be aware of it, but the SPHE, so sexual relationship health education curriculum for junior cycle, has now included, and it's on the curriculum, like that the schools are essentially meant to teach as fact, that everyone has a gender identity, that people are assigned a sex at birth, that there can be, that everyone has a different pronoun, and all of this like ideology that is coming straight out of belong to, and this whole movement, and it's being told to 12, 13, 14 year olds.
And the current debate is whether it should be told to people younger than that in the primary system.
Yeah, and obviously, like, don't hide the fact that there's people who might have be
Hmm.
transgender, whatever, but being told that you're assigned a you're assigned at birth, and all of these things, instead of being observed at birth, and that it, your biology doesn't matter, and you can be whatever, to teenage, like, very early puberty teenagers, and then potentially like really young kids, and it
Yeah,
being taught as fact, that is
I'm.
concern.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I'm just looking at something here as we're talking, in terms of the training they're doing of professionals. Like on their 2021 report, they're talking that they've 2,346 professionals trained um, in their enhanced supporting LGBTQ young people. But there's also the corporate training, three 37 safe and supportive school project training sessions to 925 school staff members, which I can only assume means teachers and, special needs assistants maybe and that kind of thing. So, and that's 2021. So 2022 was a big. I'm going to assume 2021 was an expansion even on some of these numbers. So it would seem that they're very much intertwined with the education system already, like elements of the education system already.
Yeah, and that really deeply concerns me as someone who's been in belong to, but also someone who knows who's come out the other side and realized like how crazy some of the stuff that goes on there, or like the claims that they make. I mean, if you, I'm sure you'll be able to find it on their website. It's there's two packs that they have, like a pamphlet things, like e-pamphlets, families in transition and coming out as trans. They, to this day, because I checked before we went back on, because this was one of the things that I had quoted to the Taoiseach that got my email banned from the Taoiseach's office. Um,
Fair
they
play to you.
they they still say that if you're under 18, you can go to your GP in Ireland and be referred to the Tavistock and Portman Clinic in the UK, which has subsequently had or in July, early July, had of 2022 had a closure order because it was not deemed safe for children. And there was a report done and on that from the children who'd been referred from Ireland through the Crumlin extension of the Tavistock Clinic. And there was only three audits, or three actual files from start to finish, actually completed. Like, it was all very sketchy. All, like, the whole audit was very, there was no reporting done by the clinic in Dublin, um being sent to a clinic that has had a closure order because it's not safe and has been deemed dangerous to children and damaging to children's lives. And there was one of the files was a 7 or 8 year old female who had been referred without the actual consent forms from her parents filled out, was referred to the Tavistock Clinic, and belonged to is still to this day saying that you can get referrals to the Tavistock.
Okay. Um, we could
That
spend.
that's of concern then when they're going into primary schools and secondary schools,
Mhm.
and
Especially,
involved
yeah.
in education plans and curriculums. That's of concern when they're saying, "Oh yes, go to the Tavistock Clinic that's deemed unsafe."
Mhm. We could spend an hour talking about that particular clinic. Is a final question, Niamh, and thanks very much for your time as well this evening. Would your peer group, you're 24, as you say, you're out of their age range now. Do many of your peers feel the same way about their experience now, having come through it? Do they look at it the same way you do, or do they look at it as a positive experience? Like, are there more people like you? Well, is what I'm trying to get a sense of.
Um, so the gay friend that I mentioned, he has the same view. It was very kind of like, I don't know how to like word it, but that he was kind of influenced by, not obviously not the adults directly, but like the peers and stuff.
Hmm.
Including, this was one of the things that I'd forgotten to mention. I just remembered now that in the mingling sessions there'd be a lot of talk of, within the peers, that like the kids involved in being there were talking about cisgender and heterosexual people as oh, those fucking cis het people in a really derogatory way. And the adults could overhear that and they never stopped it. There was never, no, we don't talk about people that way or anything, but it was always negative about anyone who was heterosexual or who wasn't trans identified, and that was not, nipped in the bud or said like, hey, we don't talk that way here, by the adults. But so that was, we me and my gay friend have talked about that at length, about how like negative it was towards people who were just straight people. Like, they're just heterosexual, there's nothing wrong with that, that's what the general population is. Like, the general population is heterosexual. um and how crazy it was that like that wasn't stopped, and the negativity surrounding that. And like, for a while I thought that straight people were the enemy. And but then I've talked to one of the three who still identify as trans, um and he also feels the same way. He also, like, not the same way that
He's
exactly, that it
yeah.
was negative, a negative place, and that belonged to was not good and didn't support and was not beneficial to the rest of the LGBT community. That there was no actual supports, that it was this kind of like toxic environment, that we were all just,
Mhm.
very vulnerable people, and no one was there to actually help. It was just creating fear about the outside world and all of it. Like, I don't know a single person who has a good thing to say about Belong To.
Wow. Well, that's we might leave it at that then, Neve. It's a good bookend to our conversation. I just want to take the opportunity again to thank you for your time, Neve, and hopefully we'll be chatting soon. We wish you well in all your endeavors, and
Thank
you'll be a lawyer soon enough, so you can take some of this stuff to the court. So I'm
Maybe
just
one
gonna
day.
yeah, I'm just gonna end the recording now.
Yeah.